Guys, what is up? It is James. Welcome back to another video. Today, boys, I present to you something a little bit different. Today we are talking about the legendary PvP tier list. I told you guys that I was going to be making another one, so in this video we're going to be taking a look at all of these schools' strengths and weaknesses from level 61 to level 69 in ranked PvP, how they differ from one another, and why obvious schools have foots up on other schools. As we know, many updates are going to be happening throughout the rest of this year and maybe next year to PvP, and obviously turn-based is now the new precedent system for ranked. So a lot of schools have gotten legs up and some other schools have fallen off, and we're here to talk about that today. And it's going to keep changing, so this tier list is subject to massive change. But as of right now, having been back for about a month and a half here and there, I've only recently started to post videos, but I've been kind of poking my head back in the game and ranked and seeing where the schools lie, and I've been talking to some people that do participate in legendary PvP, so I have a pretty good idea of what I want to present in this video. So without further ado, we're gonna hop straight in. The first school, oh, how the mighty have fallen. We're starting at the very bottom, mind you, of the tier list. We have Balance all the way at the bottom. And I mean, as you guys know, or I don't know, you might not know, in my last legendary tier list video, which is very outdated, I put Balance at the top. And I mean, Balance was just such a good school, but you know, as I said, the mighty have fallen. Let's talk about these nerfs, right? Lore Master got a damage nerf, its mantle was nerfed, and its weakness was nerfed. You don't have this first and second thing in ranked anymore. It's not like you can Lore Master somebody the round that they're gonna hit if you're first, and then, you know, they have a chance of fizzling that they didn't know that they were going to have because you lore mastered, or they obviously have this weakness on them that they didn't know that they were going to have because they're second, and they obviously, you know, have to hit through this if they don't fizzle. Basically, you are always playing from second, so what that means is the opponent can always 100% of the time react to what you're going to do. Lore Master it's just not as good of a card as it was before. If they know that you're gonna lore master, it's not like they're second to you. It's not like they have to hit through this. They can easily wand, or they can easily tower shield to get off the mantle and then go for a stun and then hit you if they know that they don't need to get off that weakness. It's not Balance's trump card anymore. And because of that, there's not many other hits that Balance has that can do a lot of damage and keep the opponent off of you, you know, in order for you not to die before them. So it's not even really a good utility card anymore. The nerf was a very heavy hit to Balance, and because of that, it's not going to pose a threat, you know, as it did in prior metas to most of the schools. Another big nerf was the mana burn nerf. Now, I don't really understand why this needed to be nerfed. I know that it was a really good card, but it did cost 5 pips, so I'm not really sure what the whole, like, what they were trying to get at by nerfing it. I know that the card does say it'll take away 3 pip, but instead of actually taking away 3 power pips, it instead takes away the actual value of pips, which is 1 power pip and 1 white pip, and that equals 3 pips. That's how many you lose. You know, again, that's a major hit to Balance because that was one of its you know, deciding meta cards in a match, and that's just not something that you have at your disposal anymore. It's something that Balances now opt to take out of their decks because it's just not as effective. You know, it really does seem like they've been hammering down on Balance a lot, and because of this, Balance has been getting the boot end of a lot of matches in PvP, and this turn-based system, you know, even more, you know, has decided the fate of Balance as just the lowest tier of school, especially at level 60 PvP, where, you know, where you don't have Shrike, you don't have these shadow spells, so it's not able to keep up anymore, sadly, and you know, that's where we find ourselves, at the bottom of the tier list. Another really good point to make is that, yes, Balance has, you know, spells like Availing Hands and stuff like that, and when it does critical, it is a pretty good heal. However, it is a turn-based system. You know, you do have to wait basically 2 turns in order to take full advantage of that actual good, you know, first tick heal, and your opponent can easily react to that when it is their turn immediately after your Availing Hands and do an excessive amount of damage if they know that, you know, that big tick is coming for your heal. So again, once balance is down on its knees, it's really hard to start standing back up, and you know, you don't have a lot of tools that are now, you know, nerfed in order to get yourself back up to where you need to be, where you can continue to fight that match in most cases. So moving on, we have the School of Life. Now, here is why life is so low on the tier list. It is because although, you know, it is the School of Life, life is the school that has the heals and stuff like that, etc, etc. The heals are pretty good. You can crit on them, you know, you can blade up and do a lot of damage. Here's the problem with that. It takes a while for you to build up blades in order for you to do that damage, and healing is only going to buy you so much time. A big thing in PvP right now that is being exploited is Maycast pets and the use of them. Right now, turn-based is very notorious for making Maycast pets go off like crazy. Maycast Infoul, Maycast Enfeeble, Maycast Shatter. A lot of legendary lives aren't really... Life as a school, especially at level 60, isn't really built to combat these sorts of exploits. And the minute your opponent's pet enfeebles or it shatters and you're open for a hit, you're gonna have to use those pips to heal. And as I said, it's only going to stall you so much. It's only going to buy you so much time before you need to blade up or heal again from the opponent hitting you. Weaver is only going to do so much. They can easily react to the weakness. It's, you know, again, life, it's a very powerful school if you can deal the damage, but it is very difficult for a legendary life to buy themselves that time that they need to not only get the pips, but to build the blade so that they can deal the damage. Heals are great. Healings with crit, amazing. How much time do you have to do that before you can get off the damage though? And that is where life struggles compared to most schools. Also at level 60, there isn't much room for tank life to thrive, especially because, you know, KIIIINDA has nerfed Guardian Spirit to be no PvP, so not many people are going to be going defense life, period, especially at level 60, since the only way you can get that card is through the pack wand, and nobody is really going to want to go for that wand or use that strategy if, you know, the main trump card, Guardian Spirit, is no PvP. So, you know, attack life, having an attack setup or a lot of damage and decent resist, decent pierce, that type of setup is going to be more favorable for life. And in this meta, it's just not as good as some of the other schools that are built more for needing to put on damage to, you know, get somewhere. So number 3 on the tier list, we are at the School of Myth. Now, a lot of you are, I would say a lot of you agree with me, but I would also say some of you are kind of confused because turn-based was supposed to make Myth one of the top tiers, which is what a lot of people thought. Turns out that Myth is a very good school. A good Myth can get very far in this meta, I will admit that. However, the differentiating factors between the schools make Myth not really as good as you might think compared to other schools, that is. Allow me to explain. Minions add way more pressure in this meta than they ever did in the last meta. Minions can basically force an opponent to heal out of being scared of being hit by a high damage spell such as Medusa or Orthrus if you're bladed up. Myth has very good bubble control. Myth has a lot of hits that can do 2 things at once. Like, you know, obviously Medusa can hit and stun the opponent for 2 rounds, which can then lead into chain stuns. Medusa is actually just very OP in this meta. But with a minion's help, like Talos, who can take off stun blocks, Clockwork minion, which is 0 pips, which can take off shields pretty much every round. I mean, the pressure is on. However, Myth does need to blade up, Myth does need pips, and Myth does not have a lot of health. So you don't have a lot of time to set up what you need on the battlefield to become successful. So it's really a time management thing and finding your cards quick. If your opponent gets the leg up on you, it's very hard to come back as a Myth. You know, as soon as they stun block, I mean, Medusa's out of the question if they're going to set shield, and your minion can't get off that Myth set. You're gonna have to go in for an Orthrus, which in turn does less damage, but you can still get your damage off. At the same time, you're using a large amount of pips to deal that damage. Cards like Athena Battle Sight are really good, but at the cost. 5 pips is only going to get you so far. It's more of a utility spell than anything. You know, Myth is a really good school, don't get me wrong, but as far as competing with the top tier schools, you're going to have a harder time against them. A big thing that is going for Myth right now is the sheer damage of Ninja Pigs, which is only, what, like 5 pips? Really good damage for a small amount of pips. Does more damage than I think any other, like, really good damage 5 pip spell in the game. I mean, yeah, like, cards like Queen Calypso are like 4 pips and do a lot of damage, but for Myth, the amount of damage that Ninja Pigs does is pretty much unmatched, and it's probably one of Myth's best hits. On top of that, the Grendel healing spell, the new pack spell, I do highly recommend that you do try to go for that, because if you are a Myth, 9 times out of 10 chance you're going to be running Life Mastery. If you get Life Dispelled, you're going to want to try to use your Myth crit to crit that Myth heal, and that's going to do you absolute wonders in ranked PvP. Next up, we have the heaviest hitter in the game, Storm. Now, a lot of you are gonna be like, okay, I saw this coming. Storm, it's a heavy hitter, you know what I mean? They got pretty good RNG, but you probably don't even know the half of it. Storm, especially at level 60, the beginning of the critical meta, absolutely dominates almost every school. It is a very versatile school at that. The problem is, if you aren't able to get that RNG to work in your favor, Storm will crumble very quickly. Its damage output is insane. It has very decent health with, you know, the best gear that you have available at level 60. Its Pierce is off the chain. You don't really need Resist at all as a legendary Storm. Your main focuses are damage, Pierce, and critical, which Storm absolutely excels at. The problem with Storm is that, you know, again, if you aren't able to manipulate the RNG in your favor, if you aren't able to get that quick damage off, you will soon start to see yourself crumble before your opponent. Too many RNG takes with a bolt and it doesn't crit, or it doesn't get that high end that you want, that's a risk that you're taking for an open hit to possibly crit on you. Stalling as a Storm also does not do much good, especially once the opponent stun blocks, your Stormlord is out of the way. Your only, you know, hit and utility spell is gone. You have to start going for high hits like Triton, you know, wishing on a Wild Bolt. Queen Calypso is also a very good spell that can combo into itself many times because it's 4 pips, does massive damage, and it pretty much gives you a trap to hit through. I'm making this little blurb right here after going through and finishing my video and going back and editing it, but I forgot to mention that that Hammer of Thor spell is really good as well. It takes off a weakness and then hits, and it does pretty decent damage. And we can't forget Storm's one and done trump spell, Insane Bolt, which is pretty much used at the point where you don't know if you can actually win this match. So I'm just going to enchant the Insane, bam. It's either an L for me or an L for you. That's pretty much it. Insane Bolt decides who wins and who loses. And at level 60, the highest health any school is going to get, I would say, is maybe around 4K if you're geared up for, you know, tank ice. And Insane Bolt is going to do around 3K damage, especially if you crit. So that's going to be the deciding factor, especially in the middle of a match where most schools against Storm probably won't be at full health. Once again, Storm overall very good school, high damage output, doesn't really need to worry about anything but getting that damage off and making your opponent backpedal. But the weaknesses to Storm are very obvious, and if things don't go your way, you will succumb to the top tiers. One crazy thing that I actually forgot to mention is that they fixed Storm's minion. So Storms can actually minion, and with proper bubble control and, you know, maybe a Maycast Infallible pet or a Pierce pet, I mean, at that point, your match is probably not even going to last 10 rounds. Moving right on up, we have the School of Death. Now, Death, I've always said, I think I said this in my last dated tier video too, Death I've always thought of as Fire's younger cousin, or that brother that Fire has that, you know, isn't quite as tall as he is, but is trying to strive for the same things, if not be better than his older brother. And what I mean by that is, Death is a very versatile class in the sense that Death's utility spells don't do anything like add a weakness or add a mantle or stun the opponent. Death can hit and heal back. And while that's not really something that will save death in most of its situations, it's definitely something that over the course of the match can definitely add a scare factor to your opponent, especially in turn-based, where, you know, that's not something that you have to just react to on the fly. You know, if you're second to a death and they do end up hitting you with a vampire, it does crit on you, and then your hit ends up not killing. You know, you can react to that vampire when it is your turn, instead of, you know, going on a limb and being like, well, they might vampire, they might do this, they might wraith, I don't really know, they might Dr. Vaughn. You can simply react to it. However, it's still a very scary factor. It does add pressure in the match and can very well make you, you know, change up what you were going to do in the death's favor. And we have obvious spells like, I mean, Headless Horseman, 4 pips and does absolutely mad damage. Death with Headless Horseman, especially like a damage orientated death, right? You're not going for any specific stats, you're just going for very high damage, very high crit, very high pierce. Death is absolutely a train that is just coming through and dealing lots of damage. Poisons, skeletal dragons, a lot of things that you're going to see as we move further up in this tier list are schools that don't really have to change their hitting decision based on a tower shield. If death hits through a tower shield, it's going to be a poison, or it's going to be a skeletal dragon, or it's going to be a deadly minotaur, which is going to do absolutely mad damage. Death is one of those schools that only needs 1 blade, or maybe even an infoul, or maybe just a clean enchanted hit with a crit. And that's all it really takes to start pretty much withering away your opponent and forcing them to either heal or shield or do something defensive, which is going to end up winning you most of your matches as a legendary death. Death has very good crit, very good damage, decent resist, and their pierce is not mediocre by any means. A good legendary death is basically going to be able to put you in your place and deal about, I want to say, at the end of the 3 rounds plus the first hit with a bone dragon, anywhere from 2k damage to 2.5k damage, and that's just with an infoul or just with a blade. And if they critical on top of that, as I said before, death's crit is not that bad. I mean, that might be the game for you, to be honest. Let's not forget that death has Doom naturally trained and can spam it, and in a turn-based meta, that might be your life if you can't get a heal off or you can't change bubble. I would strongly say that Death's meta right now revolves around a couple of cards. Doom and Gloom, doing very high damage with Skeletal Dragon, some poisons for getting off shields and just, I mean, withering away at your opponent's health. It's just a really good damage spell. Some infections here and there if they need it. Deadly Minotaur and Headless Horseman. Together, these spells spell basically a recipe for disaster for your opponent. And if you're not a top tier school, or you don't really know how to deal with this type of thing, it's gonna spell your demise. Alrighty boys, we only have 2 schools left to go through. So, what's after death but before ice? We gotta give it up, the School of Fire. Now, many of you saw this coming. There was only 2 schools left. It obviously wasn't going to be ice. Ice has just way too many things going for it, but let's run through why fire is the second best school at level 60 PvP. So immediately, fire is one of those schools that has a decent amount of health, not as much health as death, but a little more health than, I would say, storm. But the utility spells that fire brings to the table in the turn-based meta is just absolutely phenomenal. King Zhao really tried to do it to fire by making Fire Beetle no PvP. I do think in time they're going to rework the spell and eventually work it back into PvP. I don't think it'll be nearly as OP, but I think fires are just going to start eating that stuff up and trying to use it to their advantage. And as of right now, is it something that they really need, still being on top of the legendary? And I think they're like second when it comes to max PvP as well. Is that something that they really need? Let's just stop and ask that question. But aside from Fire Beetle, I mean, cards like Ifrit, cards like, you know, Wildfire, their bubble is 2 pips. 2 pips, guys. Fires have crazy bubble control. Things like Fuel, things like, I mean, Power Link in a turn-based meta, you know, gets off infections. If you don't have an infection up and you crit, that's a lot of health back. You're also dealing damage and getting off set shields, tower shields off the opponent. It is just overall one of Fire's best 4 pip hits, and we cannot forget Brimstone Revenant, 4 pips, does absolutely mad damage, and leaves a trap? Are you serious? I mean, what can't fire do? If a fire crits on you with an infoul, which, you know, infoul completely unnecessary, blades completely unnecessary. All you really need is bubble control, and that's all the damage you need. If you get crit on by a fire, if you get, I mean, heaven forbid you get crit on and they have a blade or an infoul or a bubble or all of that, I mean, the match is pretty much over. Fire's Pierce, very, very good. I would say 15, 17 Pierce at best at legendary PvP. I mean, fire is just packing. They have over 100 damage, right? The best fire stats, over 100 damage. Decent resist. I mean, their damage is rivaling Storm at this point, right? And they have more health, and they have utility spells. Storm only has Stormlord. Once you stun block against a Storm, Storms can't really do much, but just try to RNG you. Fires, I mean, at this point, you're playing with a lot of skill. If you're trying to take over fire, you cannot let them have bubble control, and you need to try to control the match as best as you can. Do not let them get that Ifrit off. If they Ifrit you, I mean, the match is pretty much over. You're already trying to backpedal not only the damage, but the 90% weakness, and that is a very large weakness that you're trying to deal with. A lot of fires at legendary PvP also like to carry life mastery, so if you do end up wasting a life dispel on them or a infection on them, and they in turn take that as, okay, well, he's not being defensive, he's trying to debuff me, I'm gonna go in for a hit. That hit could spell your demise at the end of the match. So it is very hard to play fire in this meta because there's just so many things that they have at their disposal to basically counter what you're doing. And in a turn-based meta, you know, reacting to 3 different things that are happening at once, you know what I mean? Like getting hit, and a trap getting put on you, and they have a bubble up because their bubble is 2 pips. All this stuff is going on. It's very hard to react to, which is why fire is a very versatile, overall top tier school when it comes to level 60 PvP. Also, really quick, another blurb that I'm adding in after editing my video. I can't believe I didn't mention Burning Rampage and the nerf question mark that received. Instead of going off, or the tick damage going off in 2 rounds, it goes off in 3 rounds. How is this a nerf? Like, yes, okay, it gives them more time to triage, but let's say someone can't find their triage, or you life dispel them and then they triage, you know, to get out the life dispel. This is literally buying you 3 free rounds of them panicking, essentially, or at minimum 2 free rounds of them panicking because of this damage tick that's going off, assuming you didn't just hit through a bunch of weaknesses, or, you know, they already have a bunch of set shields on, right? Which most likely isn't going to be the case. This literally sets you up for 2 free brims, or an infoul and then a brim and then like a fire elf or something. Or you can literally blade, infoul, and then rampage again if they're like really trying to find their triage. That's crazy, yo. Is this actually a nerf or a hidden buff? I don't know, just something I thought I should note. And then at the tippy top, the top dog, who is, you know, they were already kicking it and my previous tier list, and it's been pretty obvious. You can even go and see a lot of PvP matches now. Ice's main strategy comes from being able to tank a lot of hits, having a lot of health, you know, having okay critical, having decent pierce, not too much. At the same time, at level 60, they can still do a lot of damage. Ice's main damage points come from cards like Frostbite, cards like Snow Angel, cards like Lord of Winter, which also got nerfed, but Ice's really never used it for the opponent's pips getting taken away, so that's not really a huge nerf to that spell. Ices are very hard to play against, especially in a turn-based meta, because, you know, their bubble is only 2 pips. They can deal a lot of damage in a short amount of time because they really don't need that many blades, especially at level 60, since your health isn't like 5k or more. They're only needing to do about 3k, give or take 3k, maybe 3.5k for some of the other you know, higher health schools like life or maybe death. I know balance is the best balance stats as of right now. Balances can rock anywhere from 3.5 to 3.7k with really good stats. Pretty much Ice doesn't need to do that much damage, and if an Ice gets bubble control or they have a minion on the field, it's basically not going to be a good day for you if you're versing an ice. Ice is, you know, you're going to have to blade up to do a lot of damage. 99% of ices you're going to face at level 60 are going to have life mastery, so debuffing them is going to be an obvious given, but they can react to it. And while they're reacting to it, they're going to want to have pressure points on the field, such as a bubble up or minion or blades up. So it is, again, a lot of things that you're going to have to deal with on top of that already high resist and high amount of health. It is a very daunting thing when you're facing an ice, especially in a turn-based meta. Your main points of focus when trying to face against an ice is to try to keep them from blading up. Hope that they don't crit on you, because if they do, I mean, that's just going to do a lot of damage. Ices usually don't hit unless they have an infoul or blade or 2 blades or bubble. Some variation of those 4 things. And basically, you're trying to beat them to being able to hit you and eventually whittle your health down while you're trying to backpedal to stop them from these massive damage overtimes. And yeah, that's pretty much why Ice, aka the king of overtimes, is going to be sitting at the top. Its stats are pretty much unrivaled. You know, all it really needs is 1 blade to match the amount of damage that a death or fire is putting out, and anything on top of that is pretty much overkill, you know? So pretty much self-explanatory why the king Ice is sitting on top, and that is unfortunately going to conclude this video, conclude the tier list for legendary PvP. I am open to thoughts and or hearing how you would arrange the schools if you do dabble in level 60 PvP. Please let me know about your comments in the comment section below. I am open for discussion and debates about this. Let me know what you think. Also, really quick, I just want to say that just because I am putting the schools in order from what seems like the worst school to what seems like the best school does not mean that you cannot hop on a legendary balance and totally beat a legendary ice. It is all up to your strategy, what you decide to do, what the opponent decides to do. And hey man, you could be popping in PvP, you could be the best balance beating all the ices. It's completely up to you and how you decide to build your character. So if you're out there slaying, hey, more power to you. And that is going to be it for my video. If you have enjoyed or agree with what I said, please drop that hot like, subscribe if you are new. This has been your boy JamesTheAce, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.